Hello, and thank you all for joining us today. We are excited to present you with the first part of this webinar series around AI policy. Following our previous webinar around AI, we had lots of follow-up questions around AI policy and how to develop that. So we are lucky to connect with the Kansas Health Institute, who have been engaged in this work for quite some time. So we have Tatiana Lin and Aaron Davis from Wichita State here to share with us their work. We also would like to encourage you to engage with us through chat. So Tatiana and Aaron will be posting various questions into the chat, and we encourage you to respond and engage, as that will lead the conversation, as well as questions arise for you to post them in the chat as well. And if time allows, we will circle back to those questions at the end of the session. So I will turn it over to Tatiana and Aaron.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today with my colleague Aaron Davis. As Kelsey said, my name is Tatiana Lin. I'm with the Kansas Health Institute. Before we dive in, I would like to really thank Kelsey and Ashish for extending this opportunity to us to engage with you on this topic. So the purpose of this, or the topic of this webinar, is really how can we integrate AI and generative AI into your environmental health practice. And we will touch a little bit on AI policy, but we are very excited that two of our other colleagues on March 27 will be kind of continue this dialogue and talk more in depth which parts, how you will structure your policy and what are some different sections and specific provisions. So we will circle back to kind of give you more details on that webinar. So I am with the Kansas Health Institute, and we are one of the public health institutes. We are located in Kansas. I have been with the Institute for 17 years, in the last 2 years in the business strategy innovation area. And before I led our population health team and actually had the pleasure working with Neha on some other work, specifically with Chris Walker. So appreciate that relationship with Neha and its members. So my expertise really in health and health policies, health impact assessments, and have been recently in the last 2 years developing additional expertise in artificial intelligence and generative AI specifically. So just to kind of put in the context what the Kansas Health Institute is, you can see here our vision and mission. We are very fortunate to have a location just across state capitol. Actually seeing legislators walking by right now as I'm looking out my window. But our vision is really Kansas will become the healthiest place to live. And we, through evidence-based and innovative strategies, policies, and practices, we are nonpartisan, educational, policy organization, and we feel that we can really achieve that mission by providing nonpartisan information, convening crucial conversation, and really facilitating that learning that at the end will lead to this meaningful change. Lastly, before I transition to Aaron to introduce himself, this is just a slide that shows the breadth of the work that Kansas Health Institute does. If you're interested, please, you can open your phone and do access QR code that will learn more about the Institute. But in a nutshell, we work through research and evaluation. We are doing health and health policies. We have technical assistance education and process facilitation of the task forces. And we are actually received public health infrastructure grant, and we are the technical assistance hub for Region 7, if some of you are engaged in that grant from your organization. And with that, I will give it to Aaron.
Yeah, hello everybody. My name is Aaron Davis. So I work for the Center for Public Health Initiatives at the Community Engagement Institute of Wichita State University here in Kansas. So love our partnership with the Kansas Health Institute on all things, especially around AI. I have been in public health since 2006. I've been at the university here supporting these efforts for 11 years now. So it's been a great ride. Here's a couple of details about me. And I think the biggest interest that I really have are around systems thinking and kind of systems disruption. How can we do things better? And AI really gives us an opportunity to have some interesting conversations about what's possible. So that's where Tatiana and I have really circled together and came up with some creative ways that we can start talking about AI and introducing it to the field. I won't spend too much time on the Community Engagement Institute. Here is kind of a slide talking about what we do. Our purpose is really to do anything that can help communities improve. And we know that is grassroots efforts as well as governmental aspects. So if it's something that will improve our communities, we are all for it. Do want to call out, we have a question in the chat. So if you are not looking at that, please do so. As we jump into things, we always like to level set. What are we trying to achieve today? So if we are successful in our mission in the next 55 minutes, we will have you all be able to recognize how generative AI might be able to support you in your work, describe 3 ethical considerations, because we know responsible and ethical use is a huge part of this. And also, we hope you'll walk away with some creative ideas in terms of prompting, how to get your desired results out of these systems. So I mentioned before that Tatiana and I came together and really leaned into what we could do around AI. So since ChatGPT came out 2+ years ago, we have really been looking for opportunities. We've started a local health department community of practice specifically around artificial intelligence and how it can be used in daily operations. We've created a handful of resources and guides. We'll share one in a second. We've also supported the development of the APHA, American Public Health Association AI policy. I won't read the whole slide, but no, we've been talking all around Kansas about artificial intelligence. And thanks to FIG and some additional opportunities we've had, we've actually been talking across the country. So we are so pleased to be here with you all, learn from you all, which we'll do a little bit in the chat today, and hopefully give you some information you find beneficial. So we released a blog a number of months ago talking about why and how Kansas Public Health can really help shape a statewide roadmap, because we know public health in general, like state health departments, provide such crucial services to the state. They can really be a leader in this field to show the rest of the state how we might go about implementing things. So with that, we talked about policy and the webinar, that the next one that we'll be offering to you all. Some of that is going to be around this specific tool. So if you want to pull your phone out to get a quick heads up on what that conversation will be like, this is a tool we've partnered with Health Resources in Action and FIG on to develop, making sure, oh no, the QR code didn't open. We'll try to get you that link in the chat when we can. The tool itself helps outline some of the things we'll touch on today, but certainly more in the next webinar, of why it is important to think through policies, guidelines, how we use these tools. So it's a great resource. Really recommend diving into it deeper. So with that, I think we're ready to get started. And we know when we talk about artificial intelligence, people come at this at all different levels of kind of interest as well as experience. So a couple of level setting slides we'll have for you. When we say artificial intelligence, you should know this is the overall term that lots of different types of artificial intelligence fall into. So we were not going to get too deep and too nerdy about it. But when we say artificial intelligence, we really mean that there's some sort of machine intelligence that is mimicking or simulating human intelligence. So things we thought only humans could do, now we're realizing that we can create these programs where that can be happening from machines. You might hear the term machine learning. That is a subset of artificial intelligence that allows the computers not just to respond as a human, but to be able to learn and move and pivot. Deep learning is another subset of that, where the network is a little more complex. And what that means is it can take a look at multiple things happening at once, make some assumptions, make some decisions, and continue to build. So, I mean, the name is a really good one. It's deep learning, figuring out not just learning overall, but what's happening in the prompt, in the ask, in the task that it's been assigned. And then generative AI, that is something we're going to talk about a lot today. This is when these systems are smart enough, crafty enough to be able to pull this information and create brand new content. So when you think about if you've seen any AI generated images, those are things that the machines are actually creating. So it's generating those things from scratch. So we'll be leaning into all of those, but that kind of gives us a good basis for some of the terminology we will be using today. A lot of people think artificial intelligence is new. It is not, and I won't bore you with all of the details that have been happening, but really artificial intelligence started around 1950, at least that's what we have on record for Alan Turing creating systems, the imitation test, where computers could actually respond in real time and start making decisions appropriately. So from there, the term artificial intelligence was coined in 56. Chatbots have actually been around since the 60s in some form, and they just keep getting better and smarter as technology advances. If you were around in the 90s, early 2000s, you probably heard a lot about IBM Watson, these systems winning Jeopardy, like really getting advanced systems coming out. Artificial intelligence really took a new foothold for all of us when OpenAI released ChatGPT in 2023. So OpenAI started in 2020 and in 2023 released ChatGPT. This made one of the most powerful artificial intelligence systems that has yet to be or has ever been created that we all have access to. So it's really given us some neat opportunities. So with that, we are going to talk about ChatGPT a lot today. When we say ChatGPT, it's a system that we lean on. You can get a free account. But what we really mean are these generative AI tools as a whole. So specifically, we might say ChatGPT, we're not endorsing it. It's just easier than saying ChatGPT or Copilot or Gemini or Claude or Grok or name. So with that, because we're going to talk about ChatGPT quite a bit, we wanted to kind of give some additional information. The ChatGPT is owned by OpenAI. It is a nonprofit organization, at least at this point. It learns from all of the text that is on the internet that it is allowed to grasp. So this includes websites, social media, all of the things it is pulling and learning from and responding to. It utilizes kind of pre-trained transformers is what it's called, but it's the idea of what are you looking for? Where is it going to go seek information? Like what's the context of what you're trying to achieve? It can do predictions. It improves over time. Wouldn't a lot of people think that these artificial intelligence systems learn in the moment? They actually don't. They respond in the moment. When you hear about new models coming out, it's because massive data sets are being used to put together what this new format is going to be. Biggest thing to know about these systems is, at least at this point, most of them have really great safeguards against generating inappropriate content. We know not all of them do, but ChatGPT certainly does. It's another reason that we really like these systems. There's a lot more we could get into, but let us know if you want any follow-ups. So why is it timely? Not just because this system rolled out, but because it continues to roll out in all sorts of industries and ways. We know that lots of things need to be discussed when it comes to artificial intelligence. So here's kind of a good snapshot. But the biggest thing is that this is being applied across the board. Public sector applications are being used already in terms of both federal government, state governments. We're seeing a lot of conversation about use in law enforcement. We know in the public health world, we're seeing AI advancements in all sorts of things in terms of disease surveillance, how they're being incorporated into electronic health records. We know that there's issues coming out as well, right? Public trust and transparency. Who's using these systems and why? And is this the best use of those? We know laws are emerging, both federal, state, local, organizational, let's say not organizational laws, but you know what I mean. Some guidelines and policies around those. So it's really important for us to know what's happening around us, be part of that conversation. And we really strongly want environmental health to be part of this conversation. Public health in general, environmental health, we know that we have different approaches that not every industry has. We take a look at a holistic approach. We are always looking at the upstream aspects. How do we stop things before they become problems or bigger problems? Interdisciplinary collaboration, knowing that it's not all on one entity or one field. Ethical decision making standard setting. This is kind of the heart of environmental health. Hopefully, all of these ring true to you, and you know this voice, these values are needed in this broader conversation. So, one of the things Tatiana and I always recommend is don't just sit back and let AI policy and use happen. Be part of this conversation, be proactive. We need your voice, we need your values.
Thank you, Aaron, for setting the stage. And now it feels like the conversation about AI would be incomplete if you don't touch on federal and state AI action. And so we're just going to spend a couple minutes looking at those. And so one of the important one that came down on January 23rd, 2025 is executive order that is titled Removing Barriers to American Leadership in Artificial Intelligence. And this basically executive order boils down to a couple very important points. Is the title suggests it's really focuses on how can the United States become a leader in that space. And it also looks into developing a comprehensive action plan within the 180 days from the executive order date, and appointed David Sachs, who is a former venture capitalist and PayPal executive, to really oversee that process, and tasked to develop this action plan or lead the development of this action plan. A couple other specifics about this executive order: that it looks at how to develop AI or promote innovation within AI free from ideological constraints. That's a specific language that is in the executive order. And so, and it's also recited previous policies and executive orders by the Biden administration. So a lot of going to be unfolding in that space. So that's something to watch for, how that impacts at the state level or the federal level organizations. Not part of this executive order, but did happen at the same time at the federal level, is announcement launch of Stargate, which is a $500 billion joint venture, and it involves a lot of groups, including OpenAI, Oracle, MGX, and others. And the stated purpose for that initiative is to really build this AI infrastructure across the country, which would construct includes right now the way it was communicated, building of the data centers across the United States, which is also suggested in that note that would potentially could create 100,000 jobs. So more to see and follow in that space. And so as we're transitioning from federal level to the state level, and I do want here to acknowledge my colleagues, who is also, I believe, on the call today, Shelby Roll and Emma Urich, for leading this analysis on the state level, policy analysis of the AI legislation. And so this map that you see here represents specifically to governmental use focus AI legislation. So there's much more than other type of legislation that's not incorporated here. The source for that is National Conference of State Legislatures and Association of State and Territorial Health Officials. They have pulled, and it's covered the period from 2023 to 2024, and specifically focusing on governmental use, public health, healthcare use, and others. So it doesn't include, for example, some things related to like law enforcement and other pieces. So I think the one takeaway from this slide is that this legislation is happening at the state level. So depending where you are geographically, it could be reasonable if you're curious, or just know that can impact your work, to take a look at what type of legislation been introduced in your state. And the legislation ranges the topics of ranges from developing policy piece that focuses on preventing algorithmic discrimination, to setting up an AI task force, to how AI can be used for governmental purposes. So it's really across the board, and NCSL has a great database that showcases that analysis. So now, as we set the stage on federal and state policies, we also want to highlight that there is opportunities to integrate artificial intelligence in public and environmental health frameworks. And we know that a lot of different frameworks exist, and some of them might be under review currently, but this is the framework that I'm sure very familiar to all of you that it's one of the key frameworks for public health and also environmental health, focused on 10 essential services. And as you know, this framework focuses on assessment, policy development, and assurance, and really centering disparities and equities in the center of that. And so the question is, when we're thinking about how can we accomplish the 10 essential services, what can be the role of artificial intelligence? And the way we would like to think about that is, you can see here on the right side, actually on the left side of the slide, is particular questions that you can be reflecting on asking yourself in that space. So how can AI enhance, our ability to assess and monitor environmental health more effectively? What can be the role? And we already have some examples from the field in those spaces. In the policy development, what can be AI role in helping to support, advocacy and champion of environmental health policies and laws, as well as actually doing the policy analysis and creating those summaries as well. In assurance, what it can bring into this space of quality improvement and research, and of course, in the space as the model has the word equity in it, how can it work more upstream to address social determinants of health? So to dive a little bit deeper into the different pieces of 10 essential services and align them with the use of artificial intelligence, we just want to demonstrate one example. We created examples for each of the slices, but really just focusing on the assessment piece of the 10 essential services. Some work that's already happening at the federal level. As we know, assessment slice of essential services really focusing on diagnosing, investigating, and addressing health hazards that in their causes. So really working upstream. And Aaron alluded how environmental health is very well positioned and working to address upstream factors. We have seen an example from Centers for Disease Control and Prevention of actually implemented MedCoder that are able to really integrate this natural language process and machine learning and code multiple causes of death much quicker, and they were able to do it very efficiently and accurately using AI. And right now, there's also work happening at the federal level by CDC was happening. We have to confirm if it's still going on, but to use this application of artificial intelligence for forecasting trends in opioid overdose mortality, also using this natural language processing to understand where the foodborne outbreaks, how we can quickly analyze this data related to foodborne outbreaks data, and specifically improving the syndromic surveillance. So hopefully that shows you how type of actual activities, how to take kind of theory to practice and how it can be applied to accomplish, the 10 essential services for public health and environmental health. Another important, I think, framework that we probably all familiar with, if you work for the state or county local health department, is the Public Health Accreditation Board issued standards and measures to go for accreditation. And the purpose of accreditation is really to make sure that the health departments recognize standards for that they can meet the standards for making sure that the services align in the quality, performance, and effectiveness. And environmental health is critical role in safeguarding specific to air, water, food, housing quality, and other determinants of health. And so there could be an opportunity to use generative AI in the to help prepare for the accreditation. And the way that it can be used is in Aaron going to dive a little bit more into prompt engineering, is to stimulate interviews. So what type of questions might be asked and how your responses will align with those questions. Also in preparation of some of the documentation to see how the documentation actually aligns or not with the measures and standards. So really making sure that the documentation can be publicly shared in the sites like ChatGPT, but like posting a measure and standard and actual documentation piece and asking a question about to what extent that aligns can provide you with some insights as well. And so also can help synthesizing information. If you have a lot of information for different documents, it can be a way to quickly synthesize information and provide that as well. Of course, it'll be important to make sure that FAB doesn't have any restrictions or constraints about using a generative AI tool for those purposes, but that could help aid you in that process. And so, diving a little bit deeper into specific to different work functions or how you can do it, use it in your work, where we would like to continue the discussion with to draw your attention to the fact of the importance of having a clear rationale of why in the first place AI might be a potential solution. And so sometimes there's hype around AI and we just start using it and maybe did not have a chance to pause and reflect on is that the best strategy? Is it the best tool to use either individually or at the organizational level? And so this is actually the exercise that we are included into the developing AI policies guidance and template document that I posted in the chat a little bit earlier. It has the worksheet with that particular exercise. But really the purpose here is to go through the structural process with your team or even individually to understand the purpose of using AI. And so the way that this diagram works, it's really starting with what problems we're trying to solve. What are the gaps? And then when you move into the second step, it's about can these gaps be solved through other fixes? Do we need tech solutions or not? Can it be done through our human capital? Can it be done through process improvement? Or do we need a tech solution? And if you decide tech solution would be a good option, then decide it is tech solution should be rooted in AI or should there be a different tech solution? And then really assessing AI alignment with kind of strategic fit of organization and sustainability. Can you sustain it? Specifically, if you end up procuring AI tools, is that sustainable and do you have AI literacy? Urgency is created at the last moment because we want to create urgency once we investigate and answer all of those questions to say, and what I mean by urgency here is let's jump in and use AI. So doing this a little bit of a pre-work can help with this rationale. So a lot of opportunities and potentially also considerations around generative AI. Erin will highlight some of this from the ethical use at the end of the presentation. But generally speaking, what we hearing from the field and what we personally experienced that in of course, that it could help with some efficiencies. It could help with identifying some things that we maybe haven't thought about and figure out some solutions that might be innovative. It can also improve some of the accessibility, like creating alternative text and others also creating a plain language. And we'll demonstrate a couple examples today. But with all of that, with all innovation comes some considerations and some potential, kind of the other side. So we will need to take into consideration. And of course, thinking about the bias, the privacy concerns, to what extent the outputs you see in the systems needs to be more contextualized to the local environment. Do stakeholders maybe don't have a buy-in and what that means if the organization jumps in using AI? And of course, environmental impacts that I imagine important to this group, but also important for the overall public health community. So there are many examples of what generative AI uses are. And as I transition to Erin for the next section, I would love to ask you a question, which I'm going to post in the chat, about how you are using or what you use generative AI for in your work. But so here's some buckets. Honestly, the buckets can go on for kind of a bigger list. But policy and data analysis, we recently have tested some of that uses for that. But it can help with drafting policies, analyzing policies, conducting literature review, correcting data codes. I do want to mention or highlight here on the slide that I specifically put the word supporting functions. So you're not completely outsourcing that function to any tool with a human, or you just have a human oversight. Writing, editing, you really proofreading, plain language, even translating other languages is also an option as well. Administrative support, having those minutes created, agenda, outlines of agenda, summarizing some of this information could be a great time saver. In communication and engagement, it can help with kind of social media posts, a sounding board for ideas, and devil advocate. I think Erin is a quite savvy in using it as a devil's advocate, where it can present the opposite perspectives that you might have not have considered. And so all of those need to be unpacked to decide what's the best way to use them. But these are some of the uses.
Thanks for that, Deanna, and thanks for your continued participation in the chat. One of the things we got from the first question, which is what we generally see, there were some folks that responded on the one and even a zero on terms of their comfort and familiarity with the systems, and we had a lot of fives. And we're seeing that more and more. So one of the things we like to do, going back to level setting, making sure everyone on the webinar today knows what we're talking about. So when we talk about ChatGPT, what does this look like? How do you use the systems? So if you're a pro user, if you are a number five, you can ignore the next three slides. But when we do a search with something like Google, it would traditionally, right, you'd put your text in and what you want to see, and it would go look for websites. So generative AI is a little bit different, but a lot of the same feel. So what you see here is the screen you would have if you logged into ChatGPT. You've got your prompt at the bottom, which is similar to your search, but again, we're asking the system to do something, so it's a prompt. And then your past prompts are on the side, so you can go back to those, you can refer to them, you can pull up ones you did last week and dive a little bit deeper or get the information again. So what this would look like when you put your prompt in, you could ignore the details. This is just kind of an example. You're a public health expert. Explain to me how I might be able to exercise my authority as a director, rural community. You put those things in there. And once you hit the submit button, you're ready to submit that prompt. It generates a response. So here you see as a local health department director in a rural community, and then it lays out some examples to what you were prompting or asking about. It'll give this a title and throw it over into your past prompts on the left side. So rural health policy implementation is what it titled it. So really, when we think about artificial intelligence, how we use these systems, there's a ton of things they can do, but this is some of the basic first steps, right? Asking for something to be generated, asking for some of the some feedback on something, and that's what you get as a text response back. So when it comes to how we train, how we talk about using this, we try to keep it simple. We often refer to our ABCs. So we use these systems to assess things and give us advice. We use it to brainstorm, and we can get creative and use it to create things. So when we say assess and advise, we're going to give some examples of this, assessing documents for different things, trying to get advice on if we're trying to do a project or implement something, what are things we should be thinking about. So it's really good at overviewing a lot of complex text and then giving you feedback on that if you ask for the right things. I love using it for brainstorming. It's one of the most interesting things about this. We were planning an internal event to our organization at the university. We spent hours and hours trying to come up with ideas we could do for this. We generated a great list. I turned around and asked ChatGPT to do something similar, and in seconds, it created a list that was just like the one we spent hours creating. So we could have started with that, right, and then gone through and figured out what we could or should be doing. So brainstorming, it can really give you a kickstart into those conversations. And lastly, creating, and there's a few things we need to be aware of when we're asking these systems to create things for us, how we're using it, roles, authority. We'll get into a little bit of that. But no, you can ask it to create drafts of documents from scratch, where you can give it a little bit of information. You can kind of prompt it in terms of what you want it to have as an output. We'll get into some of that. But when you're thinking about, in general, what can we use these systems for? Always a good start to think about what can we assess, what can we brainstorm on, and what can we create. With that, the prompting can get you good and bad results. One of the examples I like to always say in almost every presentation is if you go to a restaurant, sit down and say, feed me, nobody knows how to respond. You might get food, but it could be anything. Prompting is very similar, right? So when you go to a restaurant, you want to sit down, you want to say, I want a cheeseburger, I want it well done, I want tomato, bacon, cheese. Throw all the details out there, what you want as a side. The more you do in terms of getting good at prompting and understanding how to get what you want from these systems, the better your results are going to be, the better you're going to have luck with getting good things out of these systems. So your queries should be relevant. They should make sure that you are including what context you want in those. If there's keywords, you might even have to define them sometimes. If you want a specific tone or style to come out of the system, be sure to include that. Make sure your prompts are neutral and unbiased. You can actually sway what it gives you if you ask biased prompts. So that's a big red flag everyone should be aware of. And lastly, just because it gives you something, don't take it and run with it. Continually refine your prompt as well as its responses. We got a couple of examples of that as well. So the idea of doing this prompting well is called prompt engineering. Here's a good example. You could say, write me an email, or you can get a little bit deeper. And here's a good kind of way to think through it. Action, purpose, expectation. So define the job that you want, give the intention and the goal, state the desired outcome. So in this example, write an email with a casual, professional, friendly tone to a colleague requesting their review of a FAQ sheet. The email should be concise, express appreciation for their time, include a clear request. So give those details. That way it's not making assumptions and just creating things randomly, which you may not like. One of the number one things we hear is people say, well, I tried a system like ChatGPT. I didn't like it. I told it to make my email better. And what it gave me was junk. Probably because you need to tell the system what you're expecting and what you want. So one other one, RISE, this is another one we promote, role, input, steps, expectations. It's very similar, but you can assign roles. So you are a public health communications specialist. It'll give you a completely different response based on the role you give it. You can ask it to be a lawyer. You can ask it to be a doctor. All of these things will change its outputs. Input, tell it what you are seeking. So draft a clear, engaging public health message about the importance of childhood immunizations. The steps, provide a step-by-step guidance, like what you're wanting it to do, include facts, include a call to action. And then the last expectation, let's just make sure it knows what we want. Our final message needs to be easy to understand, culturally appropriate, formatted for a flyer, or maybe you're wanting to do a social media post. So giving it that level of detail will make sure you get out of the system what you want. So a couple of other really quick examples. These aren't as detailed, but it gives you a good idea. You can use these systems to learn things. You can say, teach me about wastewater treatment, or you could use a more detailed prompt. I want to learn about wastewater treatment. Identify and share the most important 20% of learnings on the topic that help me understand 80% of it. So those little tweaks can actually get you drastically different responses. You can ask it to compare and contrast things, give me key terms I should know about a topic. One of my favorites, explain, wastewater treatment to me like I'm a 5-year-old. It really gives you language that you might not always think to utilize. And lastly, if you are using it for learning and you want to use any of the things that you're getting out of it, make sure you ask for citations. Doesn't always give those to you, but you can ask for them. On the productivity side, Tatiana mentioned a little bit of this. So tell it it's an expert in some specific field. Give me recommendations on what I need to be thinking or what questions I should be asking. You can ask it to generate checklists. If you're ever working on smart objectives, sometimes those are a little bit difficult. You can have a conversation with it about your objective and then ask it to turn it into a smart objective. Drafting agendas. A lot of times people think that, why would I need it? I just need to make some bullets. But if you're wanting an icebreaker, or you're wanting to find a way to make the meeting more interesting, or how to address something in a shorter amount of time, you can actually dive in deeper, asking questions about the agenda. So really think outside the box of how you can use these systems. The most common use, proofing, editing. So check your email or help me change the tone of this email. If you ever have difficult emails that you need to send, highly recommend you give it to these systems just to see how it might respond or give you some guidance on how to move forward. It can also help you intensify different aspects. So, critique the proposal. So if you have an email, you're wanting it to be persuasive, you can ask it to help make a stronger case. So all this to say, we really want to get folks to realize to get the most out of these systems, it's all about critical thinking in terms of the prompts. Not just what you put into the system, but also how you respond with what you get out. You can actually ask the system, why did you do this? What's the reason for this? What caused you to respond this way? You can ask it to dive deeper with exploring consequences, consider alternatives. That's great. Give me another idea. You don't have to just accept what it gives you. You can also request examples if it gives you something and you're not entirely sure what all it means or how you might want to go about it. Always challenge the assumptions, always ask for clarifications. So use the systems to the best of your ability. And here's a few tips on getting you started with that. We're going to shift gears a little bit. We're going to go kind of more into your neck of the woods. So that was great for an overview, but now what does it look like to be applied to your daily operations? So we do always want to throw out there that what we're about to share is just for illustrative purposes. It's not critiquing anything that's been made, but it gives you a good sense of what this looks like.
Thanks so much, Aaron. And I quickly want to just answer Dominique's question about, I believe, the chat, um, the fourth version of ChatGPT. And then I apologize if I'm mistaken who asked that question. But just want to quickly say that it feels like the hype with the OpenAI and 3.5 was because it was new, it got released, and then 4 were more quietly released comparing to other versions. It also seems that 4 is only available, if I'm not mistaken, only the paid version, only for paid users versus 3.5. And so it seems like it is a version of ChatGPT that has additional capabilities that 3.5 didn't have, but because of some of those additional considerations, it's got a little bit less of a playtime. All right. So with that, thanks, Aaron, for transition us to the next section. Keep your questions coming. We will address them as we go as well in the chat. And so with that section, we'll talk about how can you really practically apply to your work. And we're going to provide just 3 examples, one on the fact sheet, one on issue brief, and one on the policy development. And so this is an example of an issue brief that called Arsenic in Youth Health, and it came as a 4-pager from National Institute of Environmental Health and Sciences. And the purpose of this issue brief is to really provide overview of exposure, sources, associated health risks, talk about importance of testing private wells, and others. We just tested that on one particular page to kind of illustrate you what type of output generative AI can produce. And so honestly, one step even can be if you don't really know what to create, which prompt to create, and when you want to ask, you just have a general idea like how can I improve the page? You can even put a screenshot of the information you have into the chat and into the chat GPT and ask that. Say, I really want to improve the quality of the issue brief, but I don't have a way or I don't know what prompt to create. Can you help me ideas for my prompt? And then you can sort through that. But for that specific purposes, we knew we wanted to improve accessibility. And so in the prompt, following the model that Aaron showed, action, purpose, and expectation, we create the prompt to align with that. So we're asking it to review the fact sheet for clarity, ensure that it is accessible to all levels or literacy levels, that there is no complex terms, and suggest improvements of specific examples. So with that, the output that we have received, so it had more than that, but I put 2 buckets of outputs that it's actually generated. This is really copy and paste from the actual ChatGPT window. So the first one, it had the whole bucket about simplifying the terms. And it did say that this issue brief is already well structured, but some sentences have words that could be simplified. And you can see here the list of words, for example, toxic to humans could be simplified to harmful to people's health. And so it's really looked on that literacy level. And again, as you're professional with the oversight, it'll be really important to review those to make sure that nuance hasn't been lost when a different alternative option is presented. So again, the utility of that is can really point you to some of those places in your document where there might not be plain language and you might need a purpose to simplify it. The second bucket of suggestions were improving readability and engagement. And so you can see here that it pointed out that it has a lot of information, but it could be a little bit dense. So really figuring out that there's a way to break down, maybe using some bullet points or other way to communicate that or display it on the page could be helpful. It's also alluded to the fact that although it recognized there were some visuals or photos in there, but it's suggested maybe to add more like infographic or simple chart to really show specifically arsenic centers and food sources to really enhance that understanding. All right. So the next example I want to provide is how use that type of software or tool for enhancing clarity. All our organizations probably or you at some point worked on infographic or some form of infographic or even the slide, and we were wondering to what extent it is clear what we're trying to communicate, if the sequence of the way we display the information is reasonable, logical, or any other improvements we can make. And this is the example that that comes from EPA specifically, and it just focuses on one-page flyer on indoor air quality. This document really provides guidance on improving indoor air quality and talks about reducing chemical pollutants, checking for lead and radon. And so the prompt that we did put in here, again, following the model that Aaron showed, asking it to review the infographic, figure out if the key takeaways are easy to be identified, if the reader can grasp the main messages without reading it into detail, if the section are too technical or not, and then finally asking them to evaluate logical flow and transitions. And so given that prompt, the output we have received, kind of two buckets, and again there were more than that, but it actually gave you could see here when it's assessed the messaging and like how the sections are looking. It said that it thought that the visual and color coding were meaningful. The icons and headings were also very helpful to navigate this particular product. It noted that bullet points made the information digestible and enhanced readability, and also the main messages were clear. That said, again, with the previous version, it did highlight specific terminology that could not be familiar to the user and suggested a way to really change or propose alternatives. This is actually, again, the opportunity for the team to review those suggestions and ensure that they align with the best practices and don't miss the nuance. So that we looked through two examples of potential work products that you could apply generative AI to. And now I will just take it from one more example of how to use a generative AI tool for policy development or enhancing the policy. And so, as Aaron said, we do want to make a disclaimer that any use of the tools, generative AI tools, need a careful oversight and also adhere to the best practices in the field. So if it suggests something that's not the best practice, make sure you verify that. And so going back to this 10 essential services, we are in that policy piece slice of the 10 essential services. And again, just want to allude that doing this work on the policy aligns with that advancing the 10 essential services. But particularly for ChatGPT, it can create outlines for new policies. It can draft sections. It can analyze, like, be pro and cons about specific on the reaction. And you can even say, well, how would this particular demographic react to that policy? Or you can put those prompts to really have a meaningful discussion. It could create Q&As around the policy, like with the prompts asking what are the typical questions that people might receive. It can create communication dissemination materials and also translate in other languages. And again, with some other examples, it would be good to get individual with language expertise to verify the translation of the document. So the policy that we have looked at and used is nuisance and dangerous building abatement regulation. It's actual policy from Kansas Lane County. And in a nutshell, it authorizes a public officer to investigate nuisances, and then owner have to abate the nuisance, and then the cost of the abatement could be charged to the owner. And if they're not doing that, there can be $200 fine or imprisonment for up to 10 days and receive Class C misdemeanor. So that policy really boils down to those four main points. So the first thing we asked ChatGPT to look at is review the nuisance abatement policy, generate a list of clarifying questions about the policy. So with that, we received a bigger list, and you can really in your prompt say, top 5 questions, which then I did say, give me the top 5 questions. So why did I ask that prompt is to see, because what might be missing, because the way that the generative AI tool will approach that is ask questions about what's not clear in the policy or what is missing. So I highlighted number 3, number 5, because it's asked a question about, does the policy ensure fair treatment and include provisions for those who might be struggling to comply with financial hardships? And then it also asked about what measures and educational initiative actually exist to prevent individuals or help individuals to comply with that policy. So then I used those questions that it's already generated to say, now provide responses to these questions based just on the policy language. And it's clarified that I posted those questions in blue. It says, does the policy ensure fair treatment and include provisions for those who might struggle? It actually says the policy does not explicitly mention that. And then on the second question, it says, what measures or educational initiatives are in place to encourage community compliance? It says that it does not detail any educational initiatives. So again, it's in outputs, it's identified two potential gaps in the policy. And lastly, I said, based on the responses, suggest changes to the original language and explain the rationale. This is a very important component in your prompts. You want to see the rationale, how it explains why it suggests certain things. So for the first question, it says, does the policy ensure fair treatment and include provisions for those who might struggle and comply with financial hardships? It copied because there was some language related to that it would be unlawful for any, basically to have, so it has here, it shall be unlawful for any person in charge or in the possession of any property in the county to permit a nuisance and dangerous building to be maintained and continued thereon. So this is actually the original language. So it's just added addition to that and saying if you are facing financial difficulties, please contact the specific department for assistance. Because there was original language, it just suggested a fix that where it's found the gap. It then has a rationale describing that financial burden can have negative health impacts. And then lastly, the second one was about that educational initiative to make sure that it helps with compliance of the policy, because there was no original question that specified, there was no original question, and it suggested a potential provision that to prevent nuisances, there could be a kind of a capacity building approach to that with the community. And it's provided the rationale. So again, those provisions that are suggested by generative AI will need to be verified through the legal lens and as well what is possible. And so hopefully those examples provide you with some ideas of additional use. And back to you, Erin.
Thanks for that. And before we jump to the next section, I will say I love this example when we share it because I'm a big policy nut. I love looking at some of these things, and you might not always have somebody to talk to about these. You might also kind of have your tunnel vision on, I don't know what's missing. Like these systems are really great at having those conversations, as Tatiana just showed. So with that, we did have some more conversation about citations in the chat. I think this goes with everything, is these systems are meant to sound good and they do a lot of great creative things. They can also make some things up or be misleading. I've seen several citations that say, this is what the article said. You go back and read the article. That's not what it said. And you can actually challenge it on it and it'll say, oops, sorry. So just some of those things to be aware of, that the human in the loop aspect of this is so vital, which takes us to the ethical and responsible use side of the conversation. And I know we're getting close to the end of time, but really want to make sure you get some of the core elements of what we need to be thinking about as we use these systems. There's a lot of concerns to be, discussed. Tatiana mentioned some of those up front, but some of the big ones, data privacy. What are we putting in these systems? What are we losing in terms of our control of them? If you don't have what's kind of a closed loop or a protected system, which you can get through money and contracts, we need to make sure we know kind of what's happening with our data. We address that through compliance, right? Through training, we understand what we can and can't do, and we make sure staff know that. We don't go through every little detail in terms of like HIPAA of what you can and can't do, but we give some really good value-based guidance, very similar in terms of data privacy with generative AI systems. Bias, we've mentioned this, these systems, the algorithms, there is bias that can and does exist in most of these systems, which will be seen in the outputs. And as I mentioned, you have to be careful because you can actually introduce bias in your prompts. So how do we address that? Through one, training to make sure people are aware and have some tips and tricks to catch those things. And the biggest, the subject matter expert, if you're not familiar with the SME term, making sure that somebody is reviewing these things, taking that into consideration, always putting a bias lens on it. And you can also ask the systems to look for these biases as well. Human oversight is another, we've mentioned it several times, but what is your organization's policy on this? What is the guidance? What is it okay to, do and not do and have you in the loop for these systems? So we got to have a good game plan. I talk all the time about dialogue and guardrails. So let's figure out what we can and can't do, and let's talk about that. Lastly, authorship and transparency. This can be big. We like to talk about using these systems for the low risk administrative functions, right? Check this email, help me with my tone. I don't want to upset somebody. Probably not a huge deal in terms of authorship transparency, but if you're asking for details to help generate some material that's going to be out in the public, right? This is where the citations come in. This is where the questions about who owns this. You can ask the system, like ChatGPT, for its opinion on, did you pull this information from somewhere else? Can I use this without worry? And also, take those with a grain of salt because you probably all have legal departments or connections to know that some of these legal aspects do matter. And there's not solid guidance right now on just across the board what you can and can't do. So it's definitely something that is going to continue to be discussed in the courts, and we will always learn more about that. So again, what are the guardrails we have? What's the dialogue we need to have so we can have this? I think this is so important because you might use these sorts of things for something that's internal. Not a big deal that you use ChatGPT. But if a supervisor or somebody says, hey, we really like this, now we want to transform it and stick it out to the public. Are you brave enough to say, well, you can, but red flag, I did use ChatGPT to create that. We need to normalize that aspect that it's okay to talk about, know what we can and can't use the systems for. That's why it's so important. That is why the next conversation, the webinar that we will be hosting, is around policy and guidance and the tool that we've kind of put together through looking at best practices and figuring out what needs to be included. This is not everything, but it gives you a good idea of some of the things we've talked about today that you want to make sure are included, including definitions. We want to make sure that there is a broad context, that we're not going to limit our policy in terms of what we can and can't do by naming softwares when we know softwares are popping up all the time. So we need to be thinking about making sure these are more value-based that will guide us instead of just restrict us for the thing like the flavor of the month. So we'll get more into this. Certainly want to spend a minute talking about environmental because that's who a lot of you are on the call, and I wish we had some more time to dive into this. The guide does give some specific considerations and provisions for policies around environmental concerns. There's a lot of reports out there. There's a lot of conflicting information on the impact that these generative AI systems have on the environment, on energy use. More reports will continue to come out. We also know that there's no requirement for these systems to share these. So hopefully some laws and some things come out that can really help us get a grasp on this. So internally, what can we do? Emphasize the importance of looking at the balance between innovation and sustainability, looking to see what we can continue to learn about these AI technologies and their consequences. Some of the example provisions in the guide we have include, you know, can we use the system to advance environmental objectives? The things that you probably all work on all the time, right? Let's use the systems for good. Thinking about the public health impacts in terms of the infrastructure and data centers. Tatiana mentioned Stargate. There's going to be a lot of data centers built. Are they in your neighborhood, in your state? We need to be paying attention to that aspect. And again, staying up to date on the advancements, what we're learning, what's being put out there. I know I need to wrap up quickly. So next steps, think about the potential, think about what you can use the systems for, set those policies and guidelines. Once you're ready to implement, start small. Lastly, we've mentioned this several times. We're really excited about the webinar that'll be coming up. And I know we don't have a ton of time for questions, but is there anything else we want to address in the last minute that we have?
Question in the chat about the best preferences between ChatGPT and DeepSeek. Does the
So
purpose propose an AI function in all?
So yes, everything we've been sharing today would apply to any of these generative AI systems. It's personal preference. We test lots of systems all the time. There's drawbacks, I will say, with DeepSeek in terms of them being the new Chinese AI system. So we know there's discussion about federal laws there, but really, I think try the different systems out, see which ones work best for you. We do like ChatGPT, but again, they're changing all the time.
So we are at time. I want to thank all of you for joining, and we hope to see you on March 27th for the second part of this series. And thank you, Erin and Tatiana, for presenting. Have a good afternoon, everyone.